The moment I stepped into the gallery, I could feel their eyes on me, evaluating, judging, envying. My red dress clung to me like a second skin, its plunging neckline and thigh-high slit daring anyone to look away. Tonight was Mason's night, not mine, but you wouldn't know that from the way the room buzzed as I walked by. My husband had just closed a major deal for his construction business, and this was his victory party. Yet I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that tonight, something was about to shift. Mason stood near the bar, his rugged charm on full display as he laughed with a group of investors. His crisp white shirt stretched over his broad shoulders, and his sleeves were rolled up just enough to reveal his toned forearms, a calculated move, I was sure, to project that self-made man appeal. He always knew how to command a room without saying much. I hated how effortless it was for him. As I approached, Mason's laugh faltered ever so slightly. He looked at me with a mix of pride and something I couldn't quite place. Was it suspicion? I reached for his arm, smiling as I turned to the group. "You must be the ones keeping my husband so busy these days," I said, my voice light and sweet, like the Prosecco in my glass. They laughed politely, and Mason squeezed my hand. "This is Hannah, my better half," he said, but there was an edge in his voice. "A private reminder, play nice." I was about to say something clever when a voice cut through the chatter. "Hannah, is that you?" My stomach dropped at the sound. Turning slowly, I saw him, Andrew. Tall, lean, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed old money. "My ex." "Andrew," I said, forcing a smile as my heart hammered in my chest. Mason stiffened beside me, his grip tightening on my hand. Andrew's eyes swept over me, lingering just a moment too long. "It's been ages." "You look incredible," he said, his voice dripping with charm. The tension in the air was palpable. Mason's investors exchanged awkward glances, sensing the shift in the room. I could feel Mason's glare burning into me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. "Not yet." Andrew turned to Mason, extending a hand. "You must be the lucky man," he said, his tone polite but with an undercurrent of something sharper. Mason shook his hand, his jaw tight. "I am," Mason said evenly. "And you are?" "Andrew Caldwell," he replied, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "An old friend of Hannah's." "Friend?" The word hung in the air like a challenge, daring Mason to ask for more. Instead, Mason wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me closer. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Andrew. I'm sure you two have a lot of catching up to do, but we were just about to make an important announcement," Mason said, his voice smooth but his grip possessive. "Of course," Andrew said, stepping back with a slight bow of his head. "I'll catch you later, Hannah." As he disappeared into the crowd, I felt Mason's breath hot against my ear. "Care to explain?" he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. "Not here," I whispered, plastering on a smile for the onlookers. But inside, I was unraveling. Andrew's presence wasn't just a coincidence. It was a storm cloud on the horizon, and I had a sinking feeling it was heading straight for me. Mason didn't let go of me for the rest of the night, his hand like a brand on my back. He smiled for the cameras, charmed his investors, and played the part of the perfect host, but I knew the storm was brewing beneath his calm exterior. His laughter was too sharp, his compliments too calculated. And I knew exactly what he'd say when we were alone. As the last of the guests filtered out and the catering staff began packing up, Mason leaned against the marble counter in our kitchen, a glass of whiskey in hand. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the sound of ice clinking as he swirled his drink. "Want to tell me what that was about?" he finally asked, his voice deceptively calm. I set my clutch down on the counter, pretending to fuss with the clasp. "What do you mean?" His laugh was bitter, and when I looked up, his dark eyes were fixed on me. "Andrew Caldwell. An old friend?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving mine. I hesitated, trying to gauge how much he knew. "We dated. Years ago. Before I met you." "And you never thought to mention him before tonight?" Mason's voice sharpened, his patience wearing thin. I crossed my arms, suddenly defensive. Why would I? It was over long before we met. What does it matter now? Mason set his glass down with more force than necessary, the sound echoing in the spacious kitchen. It matters because he looked at you like you were still his. His words hit me like a slap. You're imagining things, I said quickly, but the words felt hollow even to me. Mason stepped closer, his presence towering. Am I? Then why didn't you tell me about him? Why did he make a point of coming over to us? What aren't you telling me, Hannah? I opened my mouth to reply, but the truth caught in my throat. The truth that Andrew wasn't just some ex I'd left behind. The truth that I'd once been ready to give up everything for him, that he'd been the one who walked away, not me. And now he was back, stirring up feelings I'd buried long ago. I told you everything there is to know, I said instead, forcing my voice to remain steady. He's just trying to stir up trouble. Don't let him get to you. Mason studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. Fine, he said. But if I find out you're lying to me. He let the threat hang in the air, before turning and leaving the room. I exhaled, my hands trembling as I braced myself against the counter. But relief was short-lived. When I turned to head upstairs, my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. You looked beautiful tonight. Just like I remember. My heart stopped. I stared at the message, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. I knew I should delete it, block the number, and pretend it never happened. But instead, my fingers hovered over the screen, torn between caution and curiosity. I typed back, "What do you want, Andrew?" The reply came almost instantly. You. But you already knew that. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. This wasn't just a coincidence. Andrew was here for a reason, and if Mason found out. But it wasn't Mason I was worried about. Andrew had a way of pulling me into his orbit, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to resist. The next morning, Mason left for an early meeting, his mood icy but controlled. I stayed home, pacing the living room, my phone in hand. I thought about ignoring Andrew, pretending he didn't exist, but I knew it wouldn't work. He'd find another way to get to me. He always did. So, I called him. He answered on the first ring. Hannah, he said, his voice smooth and warm, like honey dripping over a razor blade. This stops now, I said, keeping my voice firm. Whatever you're trying to do, it's not going to work. He chuckled. You sound so sure. But I know you, Hannah. You wouldn't have called if you didn't want to see me. I called to tell you to stay away, I snapped, though my resolve wavered under the weight of his words. Let's meet, he said, ignoring my protest. Just once. No strings attached. I'll explain everything. Explain what? I asked, my curiosity betraying me. You'll see, he said, and then the line went dead. I stood there, gripping my phone as if it held the answers. I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself I didn't care what he had to say. But as the day wore on, I found myself reaching for my keys, my heart pounding as I stepped out the door. The cafe Andrew chose was a discreet, tucked-away spot downtown, the kind of place where secrets were whispered and no one asked questions. I almost turned around twice on the drive over, but something kept pulling me forward, a mix of curiosity, dread, and an ember of something I refused to name. When I walked in, Andrew was already there, seated in the far corner by the window. He rose as I approached, his easy smile a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt. You came, he said, his tone confident, like he never doubted I would. Let's make this quick, I replied, sitting down and crossing my arms. What do you want? Andrew leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity that had once made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Hannah, I didn't come here to make trouble, he began, though the glint in his eye suggested otherwise. I came because I couldn't stay away. Seeing you last night, it brought everything back. There is no everything, I said sharply. That ended years ago. Did it? He countered, leaning forward. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you weren't so sure. His words hit too close to home, and I hated him for it. I'm married now, Andrew. To a good man who trusts me. He chuckled, shaking his head. You don't sound convinced. Tell me, Hannah, when was the last time Mason made you feel alive? Like you used to feel with me? I clenched my jaw, refusing to let him see how deeply his words cut. I'm not doing this, I said, grabbing my bag and standing to leave. Andrew's hand shot out, gently but firmly grasping my wrist. Wait, he said, his voice softening. Please, just hear me out. I hesitated, my heart racing as I looked down at him. His expression was earnest, almost pleading, and against my better judgment, I sat back down. You have 5 minutes, I said coldly. Andrew released a breath, his shoulders relaxing. I didn't come here to ruin your life, he said. But I need you to know something. I made a mistake walking away from you all those years ago. I've spent every day since wondering what might have been. That's not my problem, I shot back. You don't get to show up now and rewrite history. I'm not trying to rewrite anything, he said. I'm just trying to make things right. And how exactly do you plan to do that? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Andrew hesitated, his confidence faltering for the first time. I know about Mason, he said finally, his voice low. I froze. What are you talking about? I know he's been keeping secrets from you, Andrew said. Big ones. The kind that could destroy everything. My stomach dropped. You're lying, I said, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Am I? He said, sliding a folder across the table. See for yourself. I stared at the folder like it might explode. What is this? I asked, my hands refusing to move. Proof, Andrew said simply. Proof that the man you married isn't who he says he is. Against my better judgment, I opened the folder. Inside were pages of financial statements, emails, and photos, evidence of a web of deception I could barely comprehend. Offshore accounts. Fraudulent contracts. And in the center of it all, Mason. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This can't be real. It is, Andrew said. And I hate that I'm the one to show you, but you deserve the truth. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with tears. Why are you doing this? Because I care about you, he said, his voice steady. And because you deserve better. I shoved the folder back at him, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, confusion, and betrayal. I don't believe you, I said, standing abruptly. Mason loves me. He would never. He would, Andrew interrupted. And he has. I stormed out of the cafe, Andrew's words echoing in my ears. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, the folder now on the passenger seat. Part of me wanted to throw it out the window, to pretend none of this was happening. But another part, the part that had seen the cracks in Mason's perfect facade, knew Andrew was telling the truth. When I got home, Mason was in his office, his brow furrowed as he typed on his laptop. He looked up as I entered, his expression softening into a smile. Hey, he said, you're home early. I didn't respond. Instead, I set the folder down on his desk with a resounding thud. His smile faltered. What's this? He asked, reaching for the folder. You tell me, I said, my voice trembling. Mason opened the folder, his eyes scanning the contents. For a moment, he was perfectly still. Then he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. Where did you get this? That doesn't matter, I said. What matters is whether it's true. Mason sighed, closing the folder and leaning back in his chair. Hannah, he began, but I cut him off. Don't, I said. Don't lie to me. Not this time. For the first time since I'd met him, Mason looked uncertain. Vulnerable. And in that moment, I knew the truth was more devastating than I could have imagined. Mason rubbed his temples, his silence louder than any confession. My heart raced as I waited, each second stretching into an eternity. "Hannah," he said finally, his voice low and strained, "it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, the words slicing through the air like a blade. "What part of offshore accounts and fraudulent contracts is complicated, Mason? Do you know what you've done? What this means?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and defiance. "Everything I've done," he said carefully, "was for us. For you." I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. "Don't you dare put this on me. You lied. You cheated people. And now you expect me to believe it was all some noble sacrifice? You don't understand," he snapped, his composure slipping. "Do you have any idea what it's like to claw your way to the top, to build something from nothing? People don't play fair, Hannah. They cut corners. They take risks. That's the only way to survive." "Survive?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "You're not surviving, Mason. You're thriving. You're successful. Respected. Admired. Or at least you were." He flinched at that, his jaw tightening. "You think I wanted this?" he shot back. "You think I wanted to lie to you? To anyone? I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," I said coldly. "And you made yours." Mason stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "What about your choices, Hannah?" he said, his tone dangerously quiet. "Like meeting Andrew behind my back?" My breath caught in my throat. "How did you?" "You're not the only one who can dig up dirt," he said, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice you sneaking around?" "I wasn't sneaking," I said, though my voice wavered. "He reached out to me, not the other way around. And maybe if you hadn't been lying to me for God knows how long, I wouldn't have had to hear the truth from him." Mason laughed darkly. "The truth? You think Andrew's some kind of savior? He's manipulating you, Hannah. He doesn't care about you. He just wants to destroy me. And maybe you deserve it." I blurted, the words escaping before I could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Mason stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. "Is that what you really think?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came. My anger had burned through me, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. Mason stepped closer, his expression softening as he reached for my hand. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I know I've made mistakes. But everything I've done for us. For our future. I love you." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But Andrew's words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of the cracks in our foundation. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," I said, pulling my hand away. Mason's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked defeated. "I'll fix this," he said, his voice resolute. "I don't care what it takes. I'll make it right. But please, don't give up on me. On us." I turned away, unable to face the desperation in his eyes. My gaze fell on the folder still sitting on the desk, its damning contents taunting me. I thought about the life Mason and I had built together, the dreams we'd shared, the love that had once felt unshakable. But now, everything felt like a lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mason stayed in his office, the glow of his computer screen visible from the crack under the door. I lay awake, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answers to. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it from the nightstand, my heart sinking as I saw the message. "Did he tell you the whole truth? Or just the parts he thought you could handle? Call me when you're ready for the rest. A." I stared at the screen, torn between fury and curiosity. I wanted to ignore him, to block his number and cut him out of my life for good. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he knew something Mason hadn't told me. Before I could stop myself, I typed a reply, "What do you mean?" His response was almost immediate. "Meet me tomorrow. You'll understand everything." I didn't respond. Instead, I lay back against the pillows, clutching the phone to my chest as tears streamed down my face. No matter what I chose, I knew there was no going back. I met Andrew the next afternoon at a quiet park on the edge of town. The winter sun was weak, casting long shadows across the empty benches and frost-covered grass. Andrew was already waiting, leaning against a lamppost with that infuriating confidence he always carried. "You're late," he said as I approached. "I almost didn't come," I replied. "But you did," he said with a knowing smile. "Because you need answers." "I need the truth," I said firmly. "No more games, Andrew." "What else are you hiding?" Andrew reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. He handed it to me without a word. My hands trembled as I opened it, pulling out a stack of photos. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The images showed Mason sitting in a dimly lit restaurant with a woman I didn't recognize. She was stunning, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. They weren't doing anything incriminating, but the way Mason leaned toward her, the intensity of their conversation, told me everything I needed to know. "This doesn't prove anything," I said, though my voice wavered. Andrew sighed, pulling out his phone. "The photos are just the beginning," he said, swiping through his messages before handing me the device. "Listen to this." He played an audio clip, the sound crackling slightly but clear enough to hear Mason's voice. "She thinks I'm working late," Mason said, his tone low and intimate. "I hate lying to her, but if she found out about us..." The woman's voice cut in, soft and teasing. "Maybe it's time you told her the truth. About everything." "I can't," Mason replied. "Not yet." My breath hitched. I handed the phone back to Andrew, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Why are you showing me this?" I demanded. "What do you get out of it?" Andrew hesitated, his confident facade cracking. "I don't want to see you hurt, Hannah," he said. "You deserve better." "You don't get to decide what I deserve," I snapped, turning away. "This is my life. My marriage." "Is it?" he called after me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like Mason's already made his choice. I didn't respond. I walked back to my car, the photos clutched tightly in my hand. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the one I had just heard. When I got home, Mason was waiting for me. He stood in the living room, his face pale, his eyes dark with worry. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice tense. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, tossing the photos onto the coffee table. Mason's eyes widened as he looked at them, and I saw the color drain from his face. "Hannah, it's not what it looks like," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "I heard the recording, Mason. I know everything." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked utterly defeated. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said softly. "Find out what?" I demanded. "That you've been cheating on me? That you've been lying to me for years?" Mason shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "It's not an affair, Hannah. It's business. She's connected. She has resources I needed to keep the company afloat." "Resources?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're telling me you risked our marriage for a business deal?" "I didn't have a choice," he said desperately. "Everything I built, it was falling apart. I was trying to protect us, to protect you." "Protect me?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but destroy everything we had." Mason stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I love you, Hannah. I've made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." I looked at him, the man I had once thought was my rock, my partner, my everything. But now, all I saw were cracks, lies, and a hollow shell of the life we'd built together. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. I can't live with someone I can't trust. Hannah, please, he said, his voice shaking. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. But it was too late. The damage was done. I turned and walked out the door, leaving Mason standing in the ruins of our life. As I drove away, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that the man I loved was a stranger. I didn't know where I was going or what came next. But for the first time in years, I felt free.